Chapter 7 Ubar's Daughter. The girl straightened, somehow proud, but ludicrous in her mud-bedaubed regalia. She stepped away from Na, as if apprehensive that those fierce mandibles might threaten her again. Her eyes flashed from the narrow opening in her veil. "It pleased the daughter of Marlinus," she said, "to inform you and your 8-legged brother of the fate of your Tarn and of the homestone you sought." Na's mandibles opened and shut once in annoyance. It was the nearest to anger I had ever seen that gentle creature come. "You will release me immediately," announced the daughter of the Ubar. "You are free now," I said. She looked at me stunned and backed away, being careful to avoid Na by a safe distance. She kept her eyes upon my sword, as if she expected me to strike her down if she did dare turn her back. "It is well," she finally said, "that you obey my command. Perhaps your death will be made easier in consequence." Who could refuse anything to the daughter of an Ubar? I then said, and added maliciously, "Good luck in the swamps." She stopped, and she shuddered. Her robe still bore that wide lateral stain where the tongue of the Tharlian had wrapped itself. I glanced no more at her, but put my hand upon the foreleg of Na, gently, so that I might not injure any of his sensory hairs. "Well, brother," I said, "remember the insult of the daughter of the Ubar. Shall we continue our journey?" I wanted Na to understand that not all humankind was contemptuous of the spider people, as this daughter of the Ubar. "Indeed, brother," responded the mechanical voice of Na, "and surely I would rather have been a brother to that gentle, rational monster than many of the barbarians I had met upon Gor. Indeed, perhaps I should be honored that he had addressed me as brother, I who failed to meet his standards. I who had so many times, intentionally or unintentionally, injured those of rational kind." Na placed me back upon his back, and did move from the knoll. "Wait," cried the daughter of the Ubar. "You can't leave me here." She stumbled a bit from the knoll, tripped, and fell into the water. She knelt in that green, stagnant water, her hands held out to me, pleading as if she suddenly realized that full horror of her plight, that it would mean to be abandoned upon that swamp forest. "Take me with you," she begged. "Wait," I said to Na, and that giant spider paused. The Ubar's daughter tried to stand, but ridiculously enough, it seemed as if one leg was suddenly far shorter than the other. She stumbled, and once more fell into the water, and she swore like a Tarnsman. I laughed and slid from Na's back, waded to her side and lifted her to carry her back to the knoll, for she was surprisingly light, considering her apparent size. I had hardly taken her in my arms when she struck my face most viciously with a muddy hand. "How dare you touch the daughter of an Ubar?" she exclaimed. I shrugged, and so therefore dropped her back within the water. Angrily she scrambled to her feet as best as she could, and, both hopping and stumbling, did regain the knoll. I joined her there, and I examined her leg. One monstrous platform-like shoe had broken from her small foot and flopped beside her ankle, still attached by its straps. The shoe was at least 10 inches high. I laughed. That explained the height of the Ubar's daughter. "It is broken," I said. "I am sorry." She tried to rise again, but one foot was, of course, 10 inches higher than the other, so she fell again. I unstrapped her remaining shoe. No wonder you can hardly walk, I spoke. Why do you wear these silly things? The daughter of an Ubar must look down upon her subjects, was her simple, if extraordinary, reply. She then stood up, now barefoot. Her head came only a little higher than my chin. She might have been a bit taller than an average Korean girl, but not by much. She kept her eyes sullenly down, unwilling to raise them to look into my own. The daughter of an Ubar looked up to no man. I order you to protect me, she said, never taking her eyes from the ground. I do not take orders from a daughter of the Ubar of Ar, I said. You must take me with you, she said, her eyes still downcast. Why? I asked. After all, according to the rude codes of Gor, I owed her nothing. Indeed, considering her attempt upon my own life, which had been foiled only by the fortuitous net of Nar's web, I would have been within my rights to slay her, abandoning her body to the many water lizards. Naturally, I was not looking at things from precisely the Korean point of view, but she would have no way of knowing that. How could she know that I would not treat her as, according to that rough justice of Gor, she deserved? You must protect me, she said. There was something of a pleading note in her voice. Why? I asked, starting to feel angry. Because I need your help. Then she angrily snapped, You need not have made me say that. She lifted her head once more in fury. She looked into my eyes for an instant, and then lowered her again, trembling with rage. Do you ask my favor? I asked, which on Gor was much like asking if the person was willing to make a request. More simply, to say please, to that small particular of respect it seemed I had a right. Suddenly, she became strangely docile. Yes, she said. Stranger, I, the daughter of the Ubar of Ar, ask of your favor. I ask you to protect me. You tried to kill me, I said. For all I know, you may still be my enemy. There was a long pause. Neither of us spoke. I know what you are waiting for, said the daughter of the Ubar, strangely calm after her earlier fury. Unnaturally calm, it seemed to me. I did not understand her. What was it she thought I was waiting for? Then, to my astonishment, the daughter of the Ubar Marlenius, daughter of the Ubar of Ar, knelt before me, a simple warrior of Koraba. She lowered her head, lifted and extended her arms, the wrists crossed. It was that same simple ceremony that Sana had performed before me in the chamber of my father back at Koraba, the submission of the captive female. Without raising her eyes from the ground, the daughter of the Ubar spoke out in a clear but distant voice. I submit myself. Later, I wished that I had had binding fiber to lash her so innocently preferred wrists, but I was speechless for a moment. And then, remembering that harsh Korean custom required me either to accept the submission or to slay her, I took her wrists in my hands and spoke. I accept your submission. I then lifted her gently to her feet. I led her by the hand toward Nar, helped her to that glossy, hairy back of the spider, and then I climbed up after her. Wordlessly, Nar, moved rapidly through the marsh, his 8 delicate feet scarcely seeming to ever dip into that greenish water. Once he did steep into quicksand, and his back did tilt suddenly. I heard the daughter of the Ubar tightly as the insect righted himself, floated upon the muck for a second, and then managed to free himself with his 8 scrambling legs. After a journey of an hour or so, Na stopped and pointed ahead with one of his forelegs. About 3 or 4 pacings distant, through the shining, thinning swamp trees, I could see the verdant meadows of our Tarnar land. The mechanical voice of Na spoke. "I do not wish to approach nearer to the land. It is dangerous for the spider people." I slipped from his back, and I helped the daughter of the Ubar down. We stood together in the shallow water at that side of the gigantic insect. I placed my hand upon Na's grotesque face, and the gentle monster lightly closed his mandibles upon my arm, and then opened them. "I wish you well," said Na, using a common Korean phrase of farewell. I responded similarly, and further wished health and safety to his people. The insect placed his foreleg upon my shoulders. "I do not ask your name, warrior," he said, "nor will I repeat the name of your city before the submitted one, but know that you and your city are honored by the spider people." "Thank you," I said. "My city and I are honored." The mechanical voice spoke once more. "Beware, daughters of Ubar." "She has submitted herself," I replied, confident that the promise of her submission would be fulfilled. As Na raced once more backward, he lifted a foreleg in gesture I interpreted as an attempt to wave. I waved back at him, and my grotesque ally disappeared once more into the marshes. "Let's go," I said to the girl, and I made for the fields of Sartana. The daughter of the Ubar followed, some yards behind. We had been waiting for about 20 minutes, when the girl suddenly screamed, and I spun around. She had sunk to her waist upon the marsh water, slipped into a bucket quicksand. She did cry out hysterically. Cautiously I tried to approach her, but felt the ooze slipping away beneath my feet. I tried to reach her with my sword belt, but it was too short, and the tarn goad, which had been thrust into the belt, dropped into the water and was gone. The girl continued to sink deeper into the mire, the surface of the water circling her armpits. She screamed wildly, the control lost in the face of that slow, ugly death awaiting her. "Don't struggle," I cried, but her movements were hysterical, like those of a mad and crazed animal. "Your veil," I cried. "Unwind it. Toss it to me." Her hands tried to tear apart her veil, but she was unable to unwind it. In her terror, and in the moment of time left to her, then the monk continued to creep upward to her horrified eyes, and her head began to slip under those greenish waters, leaving only her hands clutching wildly at the air. Frantically I looked about, and caught sight of a submerged log some yards away, protruding upward out of the marshy water. Regardless of that possible danger, and not feeling my way, I splashed to that log, jerked hold on it with all my might. In what seemed like hours, but what must have been only a few seconds, it gave, leaping upward out of the mud. I half carried, half floated it, shoving it toward the place where the daughter of the Ubar had slipped. I clung to that log, floating in the shallow water over the quicksand, and I reached down again and again into that mire. At last my hand clutched something. The girl's wrist. I drew her slowly upward out of the sand, and my heart leaped with joy as I heard her whimpering, choking gasps, her lungs filling, sucking in that fetid but vivifying air. I shoved the log back, and finally, carrying that filthy body, soaked in its absurd garments, I made my way to a ledge of green, dry land upon the edge of that swamp. I set her down upon a bed of green clover. Beyond it, some 100 yards away, I could see the border of a yellow field of sartanar and a yellow thicket of the colna trees. I sat beside the girl, exhausted, smiling to myself. The proud daughter of the Ubar, in all her imperial regalia, quite literally stank. Stank of the swamps, and the mud, and of the perspiration exuded beneath that heavy covering. She stank of heat and fear. "You have saved my life again," said the daughter of the Ubar. I nodded, not wanting at the moment to talk about anything. "Are we out of the swamp?" she said. I assented. This seemed to please her. With an animal movement, contradicting the formality of her garments, she lay backward upon the clover, looking up into the sky, undoubtedly as exhausted as I was. Moreover, she was only a girl. I felt tenderness towards her. "I ask you a favor," she said. "What is it you wish?" I asked. "I am hungry," she said. "I am too." I laughed, suddenly aware that I had not eaten anything since the night before. I was ravenous. "Over there," I said, "are some kalna trees. Wait here. I will gather some fruit." "No, I'll come with you, if you permit me," she said. I was surprised at this deference on the part of the daughter of the Ubar, but recalled that she had submitted herself. "Surely," I said, "I would be pleased with your company." I took her arm, but she drew back. "Having submitted myself, it is my part to follow." "That is silly," I said. "Walk with me." She dropped her head shyly, shaking it. "I may not," she said. "Do as you please," I laughed, and set out for the kalna trees. She followed, meekly, I thought. We were near the kalna trees, when I heard a slight rustle of brocade behind me. I turned, just in time to seize the wrist of the daughter of the Ubar, as she struck savagely down at my back with a long, slender dagger. She howled with rage as I twisted that weapon from her hand. "You animal," I yelled, now blind with fury. "You dirty, filthy, stinking, ungrateful animal." Wild with anger, I picked up her dagger, and for an instant felt so tempted to plunge it into the heart of the treacherous girl. Slowly, angrily, I shoved it into my belt. "You submitted," I said to her. In spite of my hold upon her wrist, which must have been quite tight and painful, the daughter of Marlena straightened herself before me, and said most arrogantly, "You Thalian, do you think the daughter of the Ubar of all of Gor would submit to such as you?" Cruelly, I forced her to her knees before me, that filthy, proud wretch. "You "Submitted," I said. She cursed me, her greenish eyes blazing with hatred. "Is this how you treat the daughter of an Ubar?" she cried out. "I will show you how I treat the most treacherous wretch on all of Gor," I exclaimed, releasing her wrist. With both hands, I wrenched that veil from her face, thrusting my hand under it to fasten my fist within her hair. And then, as if she were a common tavern girl or a camp slut, I dragged the daughter of the Ubar of all Gor to that shelter of the columnar trees. Among the trees, on that clover, I threw her at my feet. She tried frantically to readjust the folds of her veil, but with both hands I tore it away, and she lay upon my feet, as it is said on Gor, face stripped. A marvelous cascade of hair, as black as the wing of my Tarn, loosened behind her, falling to the ground. I say magnificent olive skin, and those wild green eyes and features that were breathtakingly beautiful. The mouth, which might have been magnificent, was twisted with rage. "I like it better," I said, "being able to see the face of my enemy. Do not replace your veil." In fury, she glared up at me, shamed as my eyes boldly regarded the beauty of her face, but she made no move to replace the veil. As I looked upon her, incredibly perhaps, my rage dissipated, and with it that vengeful desire that had filled me. In anger I had dragged her, helpless, mined by all the codes of Gor, to the shelter of the trees. Yet now once again I saw her as a girl, this time a beautiful woman, not to be abused. "You understand," I said. "I can no longer trust you." "Of course not," she said. "I am your enemy. Accordingly, I can take no chances with you." "I am not afraid to die," she said, her lip trembling slightly. "But please be quick." "Remove your clothing," I said. "No," she cried, shrinking back. She rose to her knees before me, putting her head to my feet. "With all my heart, warrior," she pleaded. "The daughter of an Ubar on her knees begs your favor. Let it be only the blade, and quickly." I threw back, and I laughed. The daughter of the Ubar feared that I would force her to serve at my pleasure. I, a simple common soldier. But then, shamefacedly, I admitted it to myself, that I had dragged her to the trees. I had intended to take her, and that it had only been that wretched part of my soul, paradoxically enough, had claimed my respect. It had forced me to recognize that selfishly I was about to injure or dominate what Nar would have referred to as a rational creature. I felt shame. I resolved that I would do no harm to this girl if I could, though she was as wicked and faithless as a Tharian. "I do not intend to force you to serve my pleasure," I said, "nor do I intend to injure you." She stopped and lifted her head at me wonderingly. Then, to my amazement, she stood up and regarded me most contemptuously. "If you had been a true warrior," she said, "you would have taken me on the back of your Tarn, above the clouds, even before we had passed those ramparts of Ar, and you would have thrown my robes to the streets below to show my people what had been the fate of the daughter of the Ubar." Evidently she believed I had been afraid to harm her, and that she, the daughter of an Ubar, remained above the perils and obligations of a captive. She looked at me, insolent, angry that she had so demeaned herself as to kneel before this coward. She tossed her head back and snorted. "Well, warrior," she said, "what would you have me do?" "Remove your clothing," I said. She looked at me in rage. "I told you," I said. "I am not going to take any more chances with you. I have to find out if you have any more weapons." "No man may look upon the daughter of an Ubar," she said. "Either you will remove your robes, or I shall remove them for you." In fury, the hands of the Ubar's daughter began to fuddle with the hooks of her heavy robes. She had scarcely removed a braided loop from its hook when her eyes suddenly lit with triumph, and a sound of joy escaped her lips. "Don't move," said a voice behind me. "You are covered with crossbow." "Well done, men of Ar!" exclaimed the daughter of the Ubar. I turned slowly, my hands away from my body, and found myself facing two of the foot soldiers of Ar, one of them an officer, the other of common rank. The latter has his crossbow trained upon my breast. At that distance he would not have missed, and if he had fired at that range, probably the quarrel would have passed through my body and disappeared within the woods beyond. That initial velocity of the quarrel is the better part of a song per second. The officer, a swaggering fellow, whose helmet, though polished, bore the marks of combat, approached me. He held his sword to me, and had seized my weapon from its scabbard, and pulled the girl's dagger from my belt. He looked at the signet upon the dagger hilt, and seemed most pleased. He placed it in his own belt, and took from a pouch at his side a pair of manacles, which he snapped upon my wrists. He then turned to the girl. "You are Talina," he said, tapping at the dagger, "daughter of Marlinus." "You see I wear the robes of the Ubar's daughter," she said, scarcely deigning to respond to that officer's question. She paid her rescuers no more attention, treating them as if they were no more worthy of her gratitude than the dust beneath her feet. She strode to face me, her eyes mocking, triumphant. Seeing me shackled and in her power, she spat upon my face, which insult I accepted unmoving. Then with her right hand she slapped me savagely, with all that force and fury of her small body. My cheek felt as though it had been branded. "Are you Talina?" asked the officer once again patiently, "daughter of Marlinus?" "I am indeed Heroes of Ar," replied the girl proudly, turning to the soldiers. "I am Talina, daughter of Marlinus, Ubar of all Gor." "Good," said the officer, and then turned and nodded to his subordinate. "Strip her, and put her in the slave bracelets.